Russia is plunging into a new industrial crisis.
The huge Russian metallurgy industry is in trouble and they don't know what to do with it. Now they're asking for help, but there really isn't much help to give. There's simply no money.
And while the bunker dweller claims that everything is going according to plan, Russian metallurgy is facing a powerful blow. Falling demand, closed export markets, and expensive loans threaten a complete shutdown of some factories. Alexander Shevelev, CEO of Sevastol, which accounts for 14% of all steel production in Russia, issues a warning. The industry is returning to a crisis on the scale of the 1990s, when metallurgy experienced real devastation. If the situation does not change, the consequences could be catastrophic for the entire industry.
A financial deficit could, in the long term, turn industrial enterprises into piles of rusty metal. Metallurgists have faced a sharp drop in demand, and the greatest risk posed by the current crisis is a complete halt in development.
And with each passing day, the situation is becoming more and more alarming. According to Rustat, in July, the volume of metal production fell by 10.2% compared to last year, marking the largest drop since the start of the war, and almost twice as severe as the decline in the first months of the invasion of Ukraine, -6% in June 2022. Since the end of 2024, the industry has been in decline, dropping by 1.5%, and by the summer of 2025, the downturn had accelerated almost threefold.
Metal consumption in Russia is falling at double-digit rates amid a cooling economy. Above all, this is happening in construction and mechanical engineering. The end of the war could also pose a risk for metallurgists, since in that case, metal consumption in the defense industry would begin to decline.
Key enterprises are feeling the impact most acutely. The Magnitogorsk plant, one of the largest in Europe and the second largest in Russia, reported an 18% drop in steel production and a 9% drop in pig iron production in the second quarter. Meckel reduced its steel sales by 11%. TMK saw an 18% decrease in steel pipes and almost 22% in seamless pipes. In the first 6 months, TMK incurred a loss of 3.2 billion rubles. Meckel lost more than 40 billion. MMK and Sevastol recorded negative cash flow of 4.8 billion and 29.1 billion rubles, respectively.
In reality, the problem is being experienced by the Russian Federation's economy as a whole. And it's just that when we talk about most strategic enterprises, it's more obvious why. Because all major Russian companies, whether in metallurgy, oil and gas extraction, or many others, have generally been export-oriented. Sanctions and problems related to selling products on foreign markets have led to the fact that they were the first to feel all these difficulties associated with you. On the other hand, the domestic market of the Russian Federation is also, generally speaking, shrinking, largely because money is needed for the war. Since money is needed for the war, a whole range of programs are being cut, including investment programs that used to be funded by the government. For example, so-called cheap mortgages and many, many other things. As a result, for example, the demand for metallurgical products from the construction sector is falling.
And then a chain reaction occurs.
Naturally, new programs and construction projects are frozen or postponed to the future, which means a decrease in demand for, say, the products of those same metallurgists and so on. A kind of chain effect, so to speak, a chain effect.
Last year, only 20 million tons of steel were sold abroad, a third less than before the war. But today, these volumes have become unprofitable. The sharp rise in the ruble exchange rate is killing profits for the steel industry. According to experts, it is practically impossible to export profitably.
In the economy, when problems accumulate, they do not resolve themselves. A crisis is the usual way to solve problems.
Once the locomotive of the Russian economy, the metallurgical industry is turning into a sector with negative dynamics and growing debts. If the situation does not change, tens of thousands of jobs and with them entire factory towns risk being pushed to the brink of extinction. Russia is returning to a reality where metal is no longer a pillar but a symbol of crisis. And this crisis is beginning to consume the entire system of the terrorist state.
In Russia, the fourth residential building in a week has collapsed in Ufa. This time, no one was hurt. A couple of days before that, an apartment entrance collapsed in Astrakhan, and in Yekaterinburg, an office building caved in. And of course, the building in Saratov, where 7 bodies were recovered from the rubble. Putin himself has repeatedly promised to address the problem of such buildings. In the end, he reported that the plans were being overfulfilled and that happy families were moving into new apartments.
Our comprehensive plans for the successful commissioning of essential social and infrastructure facilities, as well as the ongoing construction of new housing, are being consistently and effectively fulfilled. People can see positive changes with their own eyes.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
But the cases of collapses are becoming widespread. Here's a building in Rostov-on-Don, a building deemed hazardous for years.
We've submitted all sorts of statements, requests and complaints to the administration more than once, saying that our building has been in an emergency state for a long time. The roof has reeds growing on it. Everything is falling apart. Every morning we walk by, stones are falling, but no one does anything about it. How long has it been? Maybe 4 years at least.
As for the essential task of restoring these important buildings, this crucial work should ideally be completed well before the upcoming heating season officially starts.
In Astrakhan as well, residential buildings have been collapsing more than once.
A neighbor comes over and asks, "Isn't anything cracking in your place?" I say, "Yes, it's cracking." He looks, and I have slabs on my ceiling. This ceiling is really coming apart. And right in front of him, it started cracking even more. I realized things were bad, so I left, and right after me, it collapsed.
We fully expect that this current year, a brand new record for residential housing construction will be firmly set. Already, more than 87 million square meters have been commissioned. 3 million Russian families have improved their housing conditions.
Here's another example, the Pisa house in the Zabaikalsky Krai, which, like the famous tower, is completely crooked and no one knows when it might collapse. But the authorities simply ignore the residents of the building. Apparently, they're just waiting for the house to fall on the residents' head so the problem will solve itself.
Well, sometimes you go to bed and think, what if I just don't wake up and it collapses? Where would my 2 kids go? There's literally nowhere else for us to move. My apartment is on the 9th floor and it's literally tilted. So every time, for example, I go into the kids' room and see these bumps, and at night the cracks in the walls get bigger.
We, the residents of this Northern District Building 39, are declaring a hunger strike. We live in Russia, a country that always helps everyone. We live in the Zabaikalsky Krai, which is very rich, but it's poor to the point of absurdity. Why is it that when Putin speaks on TV, billions of rubles are allocated for the resettlement of dilapidated and emergency housing, but for our unfortunate Building 39 in the north, as always, there is no money?
Across the country, the resettlement of citizens from emergency housing is proceeding ahead of schedule. We constantly talk about this as well. It's possible to evict people from slums.
And these are just a few out of literally hundreds of cases. After all, if you look at these shots and interviews with residents, you might get the impression that this is a report filmed after a Russian missile strike in Ukraine.
The entire 3rd floor partially collapsed. My child was in that room. A 3-year-old boy, he was climbing down that sheet. My husband was climbing down, and we ran out, went into the hallway, and started going downstairs. There was no entrance, no stairs, no neighboring hallways across from us. Those apartments simply didn't exist.
This middle part is sagging and constantly cracking. Maybe we should block it off there, maybe do something else. Basically, we're always patching it up, whitewashing it. And this wall here is wooden and hollow inside. That's why it keeps warping every fall and spring. This
started 3 years ago, when the bricks and blocks began to fall out. We called, even the administration, it's useless. People were living on a powder keg, but we were clever about it.
You got kicked out right away. We expected that this situation would happen. Why? Because there were cracks there, they found them, everything was falling apart.
Some might call it karma, but the main question in this story is, why couldn't they repair or build new homes with the billions that were spent on making rockets to bomb houses in another country?
Of course, it would have been better if they apartments instead of fighting over there. They were fighting over there. They're at war, so much money is being spent there, that's it. And here we are suffering like this, struggling in these kinds of houses.
But for the Russian authorities, the main thing is not to take action, but to spin the right story and let people keep dying in the slums.
Russia is not starting to massively withdraw its savings from the banks. Just in the 2 months of June and July, the outflow of cash amounted to 200 billion rubles per month. This is official data from the central bank. And the regulator even admits that the reason for the withdrawal of money is internet shutdowns.
This demand is slightly higher than in previous years. The deviation may be due, among other things, to the desire of the population and businesses to create a cash reserve for transactions amid news about new legislation regarding payment monitoring, as well as temporary internet shutdowns in certain regions.
But when it comes to temporary shutdowns, central bank data shows that shutdowns in the Russian Federation have already become widespread and prolonged. The internet was shut down at least 2,830 times. Of those, more than 2,000 occurred in July.
A great many businesses operate thanks to people having internet access. Then it's not just about financial services. That might be the primary example, though. But it also applies, for example, to taxi services. Taxis operate because there is internet, because people can use the internet to set the pickup address, the destination, and actually order the whole service. In other words, taxi services run on internet-based platforms. Naturally, financial services as well. Many money transfers are made possible thanks to the existence of the internet.
As a result, Russians don't want to be left without money in the event of an internet shutdown. People started withdrawing funds from banks, but to be fair, 400 billion rubles over 2 months is not a huge loss for the banks.
What mattered here was the trend. In other words, if this is just a momentary withdrawal, then let's say it doesn't really mean much. But if this is a trend that continues to grow, if it's 400 now, and then it could reach up to 4 trillion or even 5 trillion, which would already be at least 10% of the situation, then let's just say that would be an extremely unpleasant scenario.
And a similar trend will continue to grow as mobile internet is shut down in Russia. They have no plans to stop. On the contrary, they're tightening the restrictions. If previously we were talking about shutdowns lasting a few hours or even a few days, now we're talking about weeks without internet in one of the regions, or even months. We're talking about the Nizhny Novgorod region. In some districts of this region, there has been no mobile internet for more than 2 months now. There are also problems with regular phone service.
The most significant outages have affected residents of Dzerzhinsk and neighboring settlements. Speaking with Duza's interlocutors, Svetlana says that at the end of June and the beginning of July, when the mobile shutdowns had just started, cell phones in her neighborhood also stopped working. People couldn't call an ambulance, nor could they contact utility services. My neighbor had a pipe burst, flooding several floors, but she couldn't call emergency services.
At first, the local authorities remained silent about the shutdown, but after a month of isolation, some cities finally acknowledged the fact. Yes, it's not easy, and it makes work much more difficult. That's what the local governor Gleb Nikitin wrote. Mobile internet never came back. The situation is made worse by the fact that many Russians simply didn't have wired internet at home. While there was mobile internet, there was no need for it, but now providers simply can't keep up.
My acquaintance was told not to expect a connection anytime soon and to manage on their own for now, says Anna, a resident of Viksa. As Medusa found out, the home internet provider in Viksa cites a shortage of staff. They suggest submitting a request for connection and waiting for a call no earlier than the end of September.
The situation in the Nizhny Novgorod region is already being called a kind of experiment, and people are being urged to pay attention to how the locals are living. After all, many will find their experience useful. And considering the latest statistics on shutdowns, the internet is being turned off more and more often and for longer periods. Which means that Russians really should prepare for the fact that the patient, meaning the internet, will be more dead than alive.